The ground trembled, not with natural thunder, but with the growing, heavy vibration of engines. German infantrymen, their faces caked with dust and apprehension, pressed themselves into the shallow earth near T-34 village. Shells tore into the soil around them, and the air hummed with the invisible swift danger of machine gun fire. Peeking cautiously over their earthen bank, they saw not advancing men, but a wall of Soviet steel. A vast number of T-34 tanks, accompanied by infantry, rolling forward in a counterattack that consumed the landscape. The sheer scale of the assault, 9 tank brigades strong, illuminated the entire front with flashes of distant ordnance. As the Soviet tanks drew closer, the German soldiers fell back into their trenches. They held a desperate hope. A new weapon, the shaped charge grenade. The ground shuddered as the massive T-34s rumbled directly over their hidden positions. For agonizing moments, only the grinding of treads and the spray of machine gun fire, claiming a few unfortunate lives, filled the space. Then, as the tanks passed, the infantry emerged, hurling their pans of Werf mines at the vulnerable rear of the T-34s. Not every attempt found its mark, but 2 of the Soviet giants were stopped cold, burning testaments to this brave, close-quarters defense. Yet the Soviet tide pressed on, unaware that their advance was being watched. A silent predator, the mighty German Tiger 1 heavy tank, commanded by Unteroffizier Franz Staudegger of the 1st SS Panzer Division, lay poised in the distance. Staudegger was not supposed to be there. A broken suspension had delayed his unit, pulling him out of the main fight. But now, 3 T-34 tanks rolled carelessly across the open field before him, their formation loose, pausing occasionally to fire at the rudimentary German positions through the smoke and haze. For Staudegger, it was an opportunity too precise to ignore. He pointed, gave a sharp order, and in a flash, the Tiger unleashed its 88mm gun. A green tracer streaked across the air, finding its mark, punching straight through the lead T-34's front plate. The tank stopped, utterly inert. The other 2 T-34s, still engrossed in their distant targets, seemed not to notice. This was a gift Staudegger would accept. Another command, another shot, and a second T-34 erupted in flames. The loader worked with practiced speed, slamming a new armor-piercing round into the breech. The gunner aimed, fired, and the 3rd T-34 was struck, halting its forward momentum. Its turret began to turn, a slow, searching motion. But it was too late. A follow-up shot landed, and smoke billowed from its hatches. In just over a minute, 3 Soviet tanks were neutralized, not a single shot returned. But the battlefield was far from quiet. More movement caught Staudegger's eye. A T-34 rolling over the railway embankment, then another and another. The main force of the Soviet charge was arriving. Still, Staudegger remained calm. His Tiger fired again, bringing down another T-34, which met the same fate as its predecessors. Now, the sheer number of Soviet tanks, over a dozen and still pouring over the embankment, began to take notice. 1 T-34 finally rotated its turret, returning fire, its shells striking the earth harmlessly. Staudegger's crew moved their enormous machine, shifting carefully from cover to cover. Another T-34 burst into flames as the Soviet tank crews began to recognize the unseen threat. The volume of fire directed at the Tiger intensified rapidly. Staudegger constantly adjusted his position, denying them an easy target. A Soviet shell finally found its mark, slamming into the Tiger's armor with a deafening clang that reverberated through the hull, but it did not penetrate. Staudegger knew the strength of his machine. The Soviet 76mm guns were no match for its thick hide. He called out new coordinates, his gunner obeying without hesitation, and yet another T-34 exploded. More shells struck the Tiger, the impacts shuddering through its crew. But the seemingly invincible German tank held firm. Staudegger remained composed, directing fire with unwavering precision. The Soviet losses mounted, yet they pressed harder, rushing across the open field, away from the relative safety of the embankment. The Tiger continued its devastating work, firing as rapidly as its loader could keep pace, while shells pinged off its armor, leaving dozens, perhaps hundreds, of shallow scars. Eventually, they exhausted their armor-piercing rounds, but the German crew, confident in their tank's power, simply switched to high explosive ammunition, and the relentless destruction continued. Staudegger and his Tiger, alone and unsupported, had brought this segment of the Soviet advance to a grinding halt. Defeated, the T-34s at last turned, reversing back over the embankment to safety. Staudegger kept firing, determined to claim every possible target, but eventually the remaining tanks vanished, and silence descended upon the field. Before him lay 17 burning wrecks. Yet, for Staudegger, it was not enough. He considered a daring maneuver, leaving the relative security of their ambush with only high explosive ammunition remaining, and a recently repaired suspension that might not hold. But Staudegger did not hesitate. Remarkably, despite the countless impacts, his tank's tracks were undamaged. The Tiger's engine roared to life, its driver carefully navigating the repaired suspension as they rumbled across the kilometer-long battlefield to the embankment. They crossed the railway lines, and on the other side, they spotted the surviving T-34s and their crews, regrouping in the distance, largely unaware. Another 88mm shell screamed across the field, detonating among the gathered tanks, destroying one and claiming some of the men. The Soviet crews scattered, rushing back to their vehicles, opening fire. But their shells bounced off the Tiger's armor, just as before. The Tiger swiveled its turret, crushing the nearest T-34 with a single decisive blow. Many Soviet tankers retreated in panic. Some attempted a futile resistance, while others simply abandoned their vehicles, fleeing on foot. When the dust finally settled, 5 more wrecks were added to the pile, an astonishing total of 22 destroyed tanks attributed to this single Tiger I under Staudegger's command. His tank, though, was not pristine. 67 distinct scars marked its armor, testament to the desperate efforts of the Soviet tankers. For his actions that day, Staudegger was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Unteroffizier Franz Staudegger would survive the war and was never prosecuted for his part in the SS. He passed away peacefully in 1991. But what of the other side of that battle on July 8, 1943? Farther southeast, near Prokhorovka village, Captain Leonid Rygorodsky of the 282nd Battalion, 26th Tank Brigade, 2nd Tank Corps, waited nervously inside his T-34. His orders were vague: attack the Germans, reclaim the villages of Tetarovino and Luchki, recently lost. At 16:30, 32 T-34 medium tanks and 21 T-70 light tanks began to roll forward. There were no detailed battle plans, no maps for company or battalion commanders, no artillery support, and the mechanized infantry had been left behind. Yet, orders were orders. Soon, the sharp crackle of gunfire against his hull began, and frantic shouts to return fire filled the radio. The mass of Soviet tanks roared, firing volleys of high-explosive shells into the German positions. The 76mm guns recoiled violently, filling the confined turret with acrid smoke. Rygorodsky struggled to maintain focus, his world narrowed to his sight and a few vision slits. As commander and gunner in his T-34-76, finding targets was a constant, difficult task. Then, through the explosions and frantic chatter, he heard it. A distant howl, growing louder, the chilling shriek of a Stuka dive bomber. He could only press forward, praying, as the sound intensified, a harbinger of sudden, devastating impact. A massive explosion outside his tank, the crew unable to tell if it had claimed comrades. Then, a sharp command over the radio. 5 tanks on Rygorodsky's right flank surged forward, cresting the raised railway lines, disappearing from view. The sounds of combat escalated, punctuated by several tremendous explosions. It was time. Rygorodsky and his group of tanks moved towards the railway. As his T-34 reached the crest and began to nose down, a sobering sight greeted him. Of the 5 tanks that had gone over just moments before, 3 were already burning, vivid pyres against the haze. The fight was intense, raging all around them. Rygorodsky's tank fired, pummeling the enemy positions. Plumes of dirt rose and flashes of orange tore through the smoke, marking the end of more Soviet tanks. Mortars, anti-tank grenades, artillery, and tank fire rained down on them. Captain Rygorodsky watched his comrades fall. never to rise again. He ordered his driver to seek cover behind a burning tank, desperately trying to piece together the chaos. Radio chatter was saturated with frantic calls, attempts to organize in vain, voices speaking over one another. Rygorodsky scanned the terrain through his small, basic optic. He saw nothing, until suddenly a bright muzzle flash betrayed an enemy's position. It was incredibly far away, barely a dot, but he aimed nonetheless, knowing their lives depended on it. He fired, the shell arcing away, its landing unseen. He fired again and again. All around him, other tanks returned fire at unseen enemies, but one by one, they were struck down. The situation was untenable. Rygorodsky couldn't even manage a decisive hit. Finally, an order came through the radio. The brigade commander ordered a retreat. One by one, the T-34s began to pull back. Rygorodsky joined them, reversing as shells crashed around them, low-caliber bullets pinging off their armor. They raced for the perceived safety of the embankment, but the Germans did not relent. Another tank nearby exploded into flames, safety agonizingly close, yet still out of reach. An 88mm shell, its green tracer streaking behind it, zipped across the battlefield. It headed straight for a T-34, Rygorodsky's tank. The shell punched straight through. The crew inside became yet another group of men added to the Soviet Union's devastating tally of fallen. The remaining T-34s and T-70s rolled back over the railway lines, under fire the entire way. Finally, the German panzers ceased firing. For now, they were safe. By the end of that day, 21 T-34s and 1 T-70 had been destroyed in total. 5 of the wrecks were found before the railway lines, out of Staudegger's line of sight, likely victims of artillery or Stukas. In the main battle area, the sheer volume of fire made it impossible to definitively attribute every kill. Yet the German High Command, eager to highlight the strength of their new machines, disregarded the actions of other participants. They credited all the day's destruction to Staudegger, parading him as a war hero and an example of the formidable might of the Tiger.